this lesson, we're going to be talking about selective sharpening. But before we get into any of that, it is essential that we have a basic understanding of what sharpening is in Photoshop. And let me tell you something, this might surprise you. Sharpening in Photoshop is an illusion. Maybe you already knew that, but let me demonstrate that for you. Have a look at this circle. What do you see? This is a picture of a circle, but if you have a look at the edge, see what's concerning here. It is a little blurred. We can also say that the edges are a little blurred, right? Now, what if I want to make it sharp? What are the ways that we can do it? One of the ways is definitely increasing the contrast, but we are not inventing details here. We are just creating an illusion. All right, have a look at the edge closely. There are some areas which are closer to white, in other words, lighter gray, and there are some areas which are darker gray. What if we make the darker gray areas more darker and eventually black, and the lighter areas, lighter gray areas, even brighter and eventually white? Will that lead to a harder edge? Maybe. Let's go ahead and try that. So let's create a curves adjustment layer. All right. Now, as soon as we bring the slider on the right to the left slowly and gradually, the lighter gray areas eventually start to become white. Have a look. They start to become white. All right. And we're going to stop right here. If we take the slider on the left to the right, have a look. The opposite happens. The darker areas tend to get darker and eventually black. If we take it all the way to the middle, now have a look at the circle. It's all sharp, isn't it? Here's the before, here's the after. Does that mean that we have invented the details? No, we haven't. This is simply an illusion that fools us into thinking that the image is now sharp. However, this photo just had two colors, and that's just for demonstration. But in real life scenarios, in actual real images, if you sharpen too much, you might see some artifacts. Because again, that's an illusion and we're not inventing details to make the edge more sharper. Let's take a look at a real world example. And by the way, the concept behind all this, whatever I just showed you, the whole demonstration, the point here is that we create the illusion of sharpening by increasing the contrast around the edge. And that's what we did here. Have a look. We made the dark gray areas darker and the light gray areas brighter, and eventually that allowed us to create an illusion of sharpening, right? So let's open up another image, a real world example. Let's take a look at this photo. Let's zoom in and have a look. This image has some details, but it's not sharp enough. Let me zoom in even more for you because you might be watching this video in a little lower resolution. All right, let's do some subtle sharpening. Have a look. If I turn this layer on, I've done some sharpening in Photoshop, but not that much. Have a look what happens. Here is the before, here is the after. It does create an illusion of this image having more details. But that's not really the case, right? We are just increasing the contrast around the edge. Still cannot see it? Let me sharpen it even more. So here's a more sharpened version of it. This is extremely sharpened so that you can see what's happening here. If I turn this on, now the image looks even more sharper. But at the cost of what? Have a look around the edge. See what happens. You see these halos right there? That's what it's doing. It's increasing the contrast around the edge to create an illusion of sharpening. So when you zoom out, you cannot see those artifacts, right? So if I turn it off and on, it legit looks like the image has more details now. Have a look at the edge around here. Here is the before, here is the after. See what it's doing? On one side, it is darker, and on the other side, it is brighter. That's what it's doing. It's increasing contrast around the edge, just as we did in the demonstration with the circle, remember? So similarly, have a look at the other edge right here. See, here's the before, the original image after sharpening, extreme sharpening. We won't go that extreme in real life, in real Photoshop life, I must say. And here is the after. Have a look. This side of the edge, it has been brightened and the other side has been darkened. And therefore, it is creating an illusion of sharpening. So what does that tell us? Sharpening in Photoshop is an illusion. And we are not inventing any details here. We are just trying to fool ourselves into thinking that more details are generated. But we have to be careful here. As you noticed here, if we do too much sharpening, have a look at the teeth. See, right now the teeth is natural. But if we sharpen too much, have a look at the halos that generate around the teeth. So we need to find a way that we don't sharpen as much, and also find ways so that we can reduce the halos and reduce the artificial artifacts that are being created near the edge. Now let me share with you a personal example. No matter what software you are using, it can be Premiere Pro or any other photo or video editing software, when it comes to sharpening in post, we are just increasing the contrast around the edge. Some do it better, some not as much. The basic concept remains the same. It is increasing the contrast around the edge. Alright, have a look at this example. This is one of the videos that I was creating for my YouTube. And if you zoom in too much, have a look, let's zoom in 200% or let's even go 400%. The image looks too sharp, right? It looks like it comes out of a 4K footage. But trust me, this is a simple 1080p footage. And the reason why it looks that way is because we have increased sharpening. So let's zoom out to 200%. And if I go to sharpening section right here, see, sharpening has been increased to 50. If I just decrease it back to 0, have a look, this begins to look blurred. Let me zoom in even more so that you can see what's happening here. So this is without sharpening and this is with sharpening. And right now you can see the artifacts here. You can easily see around the edges. One side has been darkened and the other side has been brightened. But if you fit it to the screen, if you zoom out overall, you're not able to tell. And right now, if you do increase the sharpness, it does look like it's a 4K footage. So why did I tell you all this? That, my friend, gives us the first reason as to why we sharpen in post, and that is to create an illusion of additional details. So what is the second reason we sharpen? Have a look at this example. Have a look at her face. Her face is absolutely sharp, right? And the branch that she's holding and the flowers are sharp. But if you have a look at the background, it's all blurred out. So when you look at the overall image, where does our attention go? It goes to her face, it goes to those flowers, it goes to that branch, right? So what does this tell us? This tells us that our attention goes to the sharpest areas of the image. So sharpness can also be used to create attention. If you want to have focus in a particular area, let's say you want the viewer to look more in the eyes, then increase the sharpness even more in the eyes. If you want the viewer not to look in the background, then just blur the background. It's simple and it's obvious, isn't it? The third reason why we sharpen, and this is not on a very regular basis, is that let's say you took a photo and you missed focus just by a hair. And on the eye, there's just a little blur there. So you can create an illusion of it having more details by artificial sharpening in Photoshop. Now, there are lots of ways to sharpening in Photoshop, and in this video, we're going to discuss 3 ways. Now, I'm not going to tell you which is the best one or which one is the one that you should use, because there are pros and cons to each and every way, and you have to decide which one is the best for you. Maybe you are somebody who always likes method number 2, so then go ahead and use that. Maybe you use a method that we're not discussing here. If that works for you, please go ahead with that. In this video, we're just going to discuss the top 3 ones that I use all the time. And it's not that I stick to one method. I use all of them depending upon the situation. We're going to discuss the pros and cons of each method so that you can decide which one is the best for you and in what situations you can use what. So let's get started with the first method, and that is the simplest one, Smart Sharpen. So here we have our document and we have done some color grading on top of the image. If you open this group, you will see there are tons and tons of adjustment layers inside it. And there's a reason why I've put this here, so that we can discuss the difference between different sharpening methods. So for Smart Sharpening, you do need a stamp visible layer at the top. Let's say you're working with a document, you have different layers. On one layer, you have the background. On top of it, you have a subject. On top of that, you have some designs, and you want to give an overall sharpening. So you have to merge all of that into one layer and apply sharpening to that. There's no way you can apply it as an adjustment layer or a projection. So that is a disadvantage of it. We'll discuss that later. But the thing that you have to keep in mind is that Smart Sharpen requires a merged layer of the things that you want to sharpen. So at the very top, you can create a blank layer and press Ctrl, Alt, Shift, and E. You can also directly press it, but sometimes it doesn't work. For instance, let's go ahead and create a new document. And that's why I ask you to create a blank new layer sometimes. And 2000 pixel is fine, and this is a locked background layer. If I press Ctrl, Alt, Shift, and E, nothing happens. You have to create a blank new layer and then press that for it to be able to work. So sometimes it doesn't work. That's why I've made it a second nature to always go ahead and create a blank new layer and then press Ctrl, Alt, Shift, and E. Command, Option, Shift, and E on a Mac. Now, if you want it to be absolutely non-destructive so that you can change the values later, you can always go to Filter and then Convert for Smart Filters and convert this into a smart object and then apply Smart Sharpening. Let's go to Filter, Sharpen, and then Smart Sharpen. There it is. Now let's zoom in and let's see what's happening here. You can also watch the preview here. So this also helps. You can zoom in there. The first thing we do here is increase the amount all the way to 500. That's how I work with it. Now, radius is the thing that we have to control. Radius is the thickness of the edge. If the edge is too blurred, choose a higher radius. If the edge is less blurred, choose a lower radius. If you choose too high of a radius, you might see the halo effect. Have a look at it. I've chosen a very high radius. Have a look. One side of the edge has gone completely black and the other side is completely white, creating a HDR vomit effect. And that's not what we want. If you choose the radius too low, like 0.1, you barely even see the difference. So depending upon how blurred the radius is, how blurred the edge is, you have to choose the radius. The way I recommend is that I zoom in all the way and then slowly and gradually increase the radius. First, we set the amount to 500 so that we can see the difference in the radius, and then slowly and gradually increase the radius and stop at the point where you begin to see the halos. So right now we have more details, but no halos yet. It's all looking good. So let's go ahead even higher. I'm going to choose a higher value here so that you can see the difference, because usually in these videos, since these are streaming online, these videos are usually compressed and sharpening is a thing that is hard to see. So I'm going overboard here. So if you go too high, as you can see, even if you go to 3, you might begin to see these halos, and we don't want that. So let's go with 1.2. Right now, the edges look okay, but the sharpening intensities are too much. So let's go ahead and decrease the amount. Amount is like the intensity. It's like even if you applied it at 500% and decreased the opacity, it would have a very similar effect. So control how much of a sharpening you want. Let's choose 120 here. Now sometimes when you do increase sharpening, it also results in noise. It just enhances the noise as well. Have a look at the before and after. If I turn off the preview, this was before, and turn on the preview, this is the after. There's some additional noise here. So you can remove the noise by increasing remove noise slider. It keeps the sharpening, it tries to keep the sharpening, and also reduces the additional noise. But sometimes it just results into artifacts, and more often than not, it doesn't look natural, because if you have a look at the before and after, here's the before, it just takes away some natural textures here. So I don't usually do reduced noise, but a little bit is okay. Up to 10% is kind of looks okay. That's something you can work with, but I don't apply it at all. Now, at the bottom by default, you would have Gaussian blur. So what it is that it's asking what kind of blurriness do you want to remove with Smart Sharpen. Is it blur all around like Gaussian blur? Is it a lens blur that you want to remove? Or is it a motion blur? So if there was some motion blur in your image that you want to just fix in Photoshop, maybe you can choose motion blur and then choose the angle and try to fix that here. But for most cases, Gaussian blur is the one. Motion blur is actually very useful when, let's say, you're taking a photo of something and the camera shook a little. It's an important photo. To some extent, you can kind of fix that using Smart Sharpen. Anyway, that's for some other time. These values seem okay to us. Hit OK. Take a look at the before and after. Here is the before, here is the after. We see a significant difference. Now still here, there are some artifacts. If you have a look, the other side of the edge has been darkened to create an illusion of sharpening. But that's okay. If you zoom out to even 300%, you cannot even tell. Usually 100% is the correct zoom percentage where you should be analyzing an image. Nobody's gonna zoom in this much and check if it has been sharpened or not. This is just perfect. Now by now you must think Smart Sharpening is amazing. And it actually is, because it gives you so many options. Plus, if you want to go ahead and change the values later, you can always double click here. It's absolutely non-destructive and you can change the values here. You can also create a preset. If you double click here, you can just have a look. You can load a preset, save it as a preset. So you can do that. If you do want to go even a little more advanced, you can work with shadows and highlights as well. So you do get a lot of options. It is amazing, actually, but it has to have some drawbacks, right? Yes, it does. The major drawback is it requires you to create a stamp visible layer, as we discussed before. And what is the problem with that, you might ask? Well, let's say we had not sharpened, but now we have, and we want to change the curves here. We want to just decrease the contrast even a little more and add a little more highlights here, or make some kind of change here and there. Or maybe let's go to blues and just add a faded look. Now what happens is, this is the change we did. Now if we turn on our sharpening, Well, all of the changes we did are gone. What do we do now? The only option is to just, again, turn it off, create another stamp visible layer. See, right now it's not creating because this layer is turned off. That's why I asked you to create an empty layer and then press Ctrl, Alt, Shift and E. Alright, so create a stamp visible layer and then convert it to, smart object, and then copy this smart filter to the new one. Now this is sharpened as well. It's going to take time. So it's a very long process. Sometimes, depending upon the change, you might have to even do the values all over again. So if you change the size of the image, you would have a different radius value. You would have a different intensity or amount value. So again, it's a mess to again create a stamp visible layer at the top and then again apply the sharpening filter. So that is one drawback. But if you're confident about your edit, let's say this is what you want to go for and you're confident about it. So as a last step, Smart Sharpen does make a lot of sense. Now let's talk about our second method of sharpening that is used widely, and you must have heard about it before. That is high pass. So let's go ahead and delete that. In this case as well, you do have to create a stamp visible layer at the top, but this time it's a little different because it's not something that covers all of the layers beneath it. It's a projection. So let's create an empty layer, press Ctrl, Alt, Shift and E. And now, first, if you want, and if you just want, you can take away all the colors, because if you directly apply high pass here, have a look, it accentuates the edges, but it also keeps some colors. So some people do it with colors, some people do it without it. So if you don't want to take the chance of having additional colors around the edge, desaturate it by pressing Ctrl, Shift U, Command Shift U on a Mac. Now, let's convert it into a smart object the similar way we did before, and for organization purposes you can name this High Pass Sharpening. Now let's go to Filter, Other and then High Pass. Now I do recommend changing the blend mode first and then choosing the High Pass filter, but I'm doing the High Pass first now so that you can see what happens when we apply High Pass. So let's apply High Pass. It does the exact same thing. Have a look around the edge. It increases contrast around the edge, so one side of the edge it darkens, other side of the edge it brightens, and all of the rest of the areas it just adds gray to it. Areas which are not the edge. So now you have to just decrease the radius all the way to the left hand side and slowly and gradually increase it to a point where the halos don't show up that much. So at 1.2 there are halos, but if you zoom out, it doesn't look that much accentuated. If you go too high, it's the same as Smart Sharpen. Remember the radius there? It's the exact same thing. It's something you can see visually now. Alright, so if you choose too high, you can see the halos are clearly visible around the edge, and even if you zoom out, you can see the halos. So similarly, we can choose the same value here. I think we chose 1.2 there, so we can choose 1.2 here as well. Hit OK. Now, what is the blend mode that hides everything that is 50% gray, makes anything that is darker, which is darker than 50% gray, and brightens anything that is brighter than 50% gray? What is that blend mode? We talked about it before. Overlay, right? So change the blend mode from normal to overlay and have a look. The sharpening has been done. So here is the before. Here is the after. Now, if you think the sharpening is too much, you can either decrease the opacity or change the blend mode from overlay to soft light. It is a milder version of overlay. So we're going to go back to overlay. So again, let's take a look. Here's the before. Here is the after. Now, what is the advantage of high pass sharpening? Now, of course, Smart Sharpening is a little more smarter. It directly gives you access to a lot of controls. You can control the intensity, you can control the radius, you can also remove noise if you wish to, you can also remove motion blur if you want to. What is the advantage here? It's not that smart, but here's the advantage. The advantage is the projection nature of high pass. So let's say if you want a little more sharpening, you can always double up the layer by pressing Ctrl or Command J, and you have double the sharpening. Now let's say, since this is just a projection, if you wanted to change something beneath it, which is just an adjustment, I'm not talking about moving the image here and there, you can do that easily, and it will happen in real time. Let's say you wanted to increase the contrast a little more. You don't have to go back to high pass and redo the whole thing again as we did with Smart Sharpen. One more advantage of high pass and why it's commonly used is that you can stack on sharpening with this. Let's say you wanted a little more sharpening on the face area. Just double up this layer by pressing Ctrl or Command J. And for the face area, you wanted a little more radius. Let's say 1.6. Alright, and now you can hold the Alt key or the Option key and click on the mask button, take the brush, white as the foreground color, and just paint over the face area. And by the way, we're going to discuss this later. we're going to discuss it in selective sharpening. Let's say you want a little more sharpening on the eyes. You're going to make one more copy and then maybe have a different radius or the same radius. It's up to you. So I'm going to go with 2 just for a change. And then in the mask, paint it with black again. Don't worry if you feel that it's going too fast. We're going to discuss this in detail later. And then you can paint white in areas where you want some additional sharpening. See that? So the advantage here is that you can also stack up some sharpening if you wish to. So for different areas of the image, you can have different levels of sharpening. You can have tons of masking. Everything is so easy to do. And even after doing all that, if you want to do little tweaks beneath it, you can easily do that. You don't have to do the whole high pass sharpening thing all over again. If it were smart sharpening and you created a lot of sharpening layers and under it you made some color change, well, you have to do all of those layers again, and it can be an absolutely tedious process. So depending upon the situation, depending upon your requirement, you have to choose which one works better for you. The third technique is something that I personally use from time to time, and that is an interesting technique because in this technique, the more we blur, the more sharper your image gets. How come, you might ask? This is how. So again, in this case, we do require a merged layer or a stamp visible layer at the very top. So again, this is one major advantage of this method. But in some cases, it does a far better job of sharpening than high pass. And in some cases, it can have even more details in certain dark areas. Or let's say if you're adding sharpness in the eyes, I have seen in my experience that this method sometimes has more details in the eyes than the other methods. So here's how it works. After you have created a stamp visible layer at the top, make a copy of it. So have 2 of these. The one at the top, you have to invert it. Okay, and then change the blend mode of that layer from normal to vivid light. You see something familiar? Does this ring a bell? Most of the area is gray, right? All we have to do now is to just accentuate the edge and change the overall blend mode of the entire mechanism of these 2 layers that we have created to overlay. So right now it's an inverted layer, it's an inverted image. So whatever we are going to do with this, it's going to be a little opposite, right? So if we add blur to it, first of all, let's go to filter, convert for smart filters, hit OK. Now, if we go to filter, blur, and then Gaussian blur, have a look. As we begin to increase the radius, see what happens. The edges begin to get accentuated. And you can straight away notice here that in this case, there are more details generated, right, than high pass. So let's go for the same 1.2 here. And we have to create a group of both of these. Select the first one, hold the Ctrl or Command, select the second one, press Ctrl or Command G. Now change the overall blend mode to overlay. Now have a look. This, in my opinion, has more details than high pass. Have a look inside the eyes. Here's the before, here's the after. So much more details right now. You wouldn't be zooming in that much. So this would be the overall zoom. Here's the before, here's the after. I just love the amount of sharpening here. Now, of course, we don't want so much sharpening on the sweater that he's wearing or the shirt, but we do want sharpening on the face. So you can always go ahead and use masking here. So hold the Alt key, the Option key, click on the mask button. This creates a negative mask, and then you can take the brush and only paint over the areas that you do want to sharpen. And if there are areas that you want to sharpen a little less, of course, we don't want to sharpen the background. So let's say these sweater areas you want to sharpen less. So you can always go with a lower flow, like 10% or 20%, and then paint over those areas. If you want to sharpen an area more, keep on painting on that area because it's not opacity, it's flow. So flow allows for us to have more intensity if we continuously paint in an area, unlike opacity. So this is something I do from time to time. So those are the 3 methods. Now you can go ahead and try all of these 3 sharpening methods with your projects and see which one fits the best for you. My job is to tell you different methods and techniques that are there and the ones that I recommend. It is your job to pick the best for your situation, for your personality, and for your style. And that's what, my friend, makes you a unique artist. Now let's discuss selective sharpening. Now when it comes to selective sharpening, as we did a little preview here, we're going to be using the high pass method because it's the easiest to use when it comes to selectively sharpen. So using this method, we're going to drag the attention of the viewer towards a particular area. In this case, we're going to use the eyes as the source of attention. Let's do it. So here we have our example, and first of all, we need to decide how many levels of sharpening do you want. Let's say we want 3 levels of sharpening, one for the entire face, one for the nose and the overall eyes and a little bit of the cheeks and the teeth, a little bit of the features, and one for just the details in the eyes. So let's make 3 copies of the background layer. by pressing Ctrl or Command J. First of all, let's press it once. Desaturate it by pressing Ctrl Shift U, Command Shift U, and then make 2 more copies. Now we have 3 levels of sharpening. The first is level 1. Let's go to Filter and then Convert for Smart Filters. Hit OK. Now we need to change the blend mode to what? Overlay. Remember I told you that I recommend changing the blend mode first and then apply high pass? That time I did the high pass first so that you can see what's happening in the high pass, how the edges are being accentuated. In the practical world, I would recommend changing the blend mode first so that when you go ahead and apply the high pass, see what happens. Go to Filter, Other, High Pass. So as you change the values, you can see real time what is happening with the image. So that's why I recommend it. So let's take a look at the overall face and slowly and gradually keep on increasing the radius. Now we don't have to set the value so high so that unnecessary details can be accentuated. For example, if we set it too high, have a look, the wrinkles are being accentuated. Apart from halos or artifacts, this can also be an issue, over sharpening, or in other words, adding additional details that we do not want. So for the overall face, let's go with 1.4. All right, that works. Now we have to decide which are the areas where you do want the level 1 sharpening. So hold the Alt key or the Option key, click on the mask button to create a negative mask. Take the brush, take a soft round brush, white as the foreground color. So we want it only on the face. So let's paint with white on the face, increase the flow to 100%. And just let's paint over the face. A little bit down here, and there you go. I don't know if you can see it. So here is the before, not that sharp. Here is the after. So I'm going to zoom in a little more so that you can see what's happening here. So here's the before, here's the after. So this is an overall sharpening. Now on top of that, let's do some features. So let's turn on level 2. Let's name it level 2. Now let's go to Filter, Convert for Smart Filters, hit OK. Now change the blend mode first by going to this drop down right here. We were waiting. Click on this drop down, change it to overlay, then go to Filter, Other, and then High Pass. It will be at the very top as well, so you can click there because it's the last filter. Now of course with this we might want to go with a little higher value. Just focus on the features like the overall eyes and the mouth. So let's go with a little higher value in here of 3, or let's go with 2.6. Okay, now you can also have the same value if you wish to. You can also double up the sharpening with the same radius. So hold the Alt key, the Option key, and click on the mask button. And now you might want to decrease the flow a little bit. So let's set it to about 20% and start painting over the areas where you do want a little more sharpening. So in this cheek area, we do want a little sharpening around here, maybe a little bit on the forehead right here. Of course, all over the eyes here as well. And let's increase the flow to 100. And here, nose area, not on the teeth, but we do want a little bit on the lips. Now we don't want in this area, so let's erase it from there. That was some additional unnecessary sharpening. All right, paint back in the areas where you do want it. All right, so that looks enough to me. So you can also dab in certain areas and then erase the extras where you don't want it. So let's say we didn't want it on the wrinkled areas. So let's paint that area with black. Paint that area with black. We removed too much. So let's paint back in with 20% flow. All right. Okay. Now let's do the third level. Let's turn it on. And let's first of all name it for organization, level 3. Filter, Convert for Smart Filters, hit OK, change the blend mode to overlay. Yes, we gotta wait for the conversion, change it to overlay. Then go to Filter, Other, and High Pass. Also, you can also click on the top, or you can also use the shortcut right here, which is Alt Control F. Let's choose that. And this time, let's go with 4. Very high value, hit OK. Again, hold the Alt key, the Option key, click on the mask button. And this time we only want to paint on the areas where we do want some additional extra details. So let's increase the flow to 100% and paint on inside the eyes. Have a look at the difference. So here's the before, here's the after. See that? See the details coming through? Similarly, you can do the same with the other eye. You can also do the same with the edge of the eyes if you wish to. Some edges you can just dab in a little bit here. You can dab in the highlight areas a little there. You can have some edge details here as well. And additionally, if you do want some additional details on the lips or the highlights of the lips in this area, you can have that. You can have a little more detail on the cheek shine area and maybe a little more detail on the eyebrow. See, it makes a difference, a massive difference. So there you go, my friend. 3 levels of sharpening really brings out the best in this image. Let's take a look at the before and after. So here is the before. Not that sharp. I recommend watching this video in the highest quality possible. So choose the highest resolution, even if you're watching with a lower resolution right now. Just for this little section, change it to 1080p. So here, my friend, is the before and here is the after. As you can see, there's an overall sharpening on the face, a little more sharpening on the eyes, even a little more sharpening inside the eyeball. That creates levels of sharpening, and that, my friend, is selective sharpening. I hope this video helped you with sharpening in Photoshop. Always keep in mind, sharpening in post is an illusion, and that is just simply adding contrast around the edge, making one side brighter and the other side darker. Some techniques can have more halos, some techniques can have less halos. Depending upon your situation, you can choose what techniques works best for you. If you want to stack up, use high pass. If you want to just apply a last filter at the end of the project, smart sharpen is really great. If you do want a little more details in the dark areas, if you do want to just generate details in all of the areas, use the third method where we used Gaussian blur and vivid light. And again, you are the artist, you choose what to do, and that makes you unique. Thank you so much for watching this lesson. I'll see you in the next one. Till then, stay tuned and make sure that you keep creating.